So I'm with Troy Peterson from BJB, and he's technical sales, and he really knows just about everything there is to know about the resin molding process. So we're going to take a look at some of the materials and processes and tools that are going to be needed to actually mold a part. So Troy, tell us a little bit of what we're looking at in front of here. Is what are these compounds, and what do we need to get started?
Sure. Okay, well, first and foremost, we've got to look at our mold material itself, the silicone. This is a two-part A and B system. It's a material that you would mix at a given ratio. You have a certain amount of work time. This has got about a 40-minute work time or so. That means it's still liquid when you're pouring it. Okay. And this is cures at room temperature, and this is what we're going to make
and
our mold out of.
That's what we're looking at, this blue material here.
Exactly.
So
Gallon kit will do roughly about a mold this size, two-part.
Okay, great. So, and then now we've produced the mold itself. Now we need to pour something into the mold, right? So that's, as we're looking over here.
Correct. Yeah, so this is our casting material, and this is ultimately what the parts that we want to make are going to be made out of this material.
Okay.
And this is a two-part polyurethane. Once again, it's mixed at a given ratio. We have a certain amount of working time where it's liquid. We can get it poured into the mold.
So you can just take these two parts, pour them together, and we've got almost like a plastic, like an ABS type plastic.
Exactly. Once this is cured up, it's going to produce a part that in many ways simulates an ABS plastic. So with as far as its flexibility or stiffness, hardness, and then some of the toughness and impact, it's going to simulate something like an ABS.
Okay, and we chose this one for this demo, but I believe you guys have several hundred different types of compounds we can choose from, anything from really flexible materials to hard ones. We can pigment them with different colors. We have a bunch of different choices.
Yeah, we've got a huge range. I mean, everything from very, very soft elastomeric, skin-like materials, all the way up to very rigid, almost polycarbonate type materials, very stiff. Right. Everything in between.
And with one mold that I've already produced, I can actually use multiple materials, right, and different types of parts.
That's the great flexibility about this type of process, is I could produce something that's as flexible as an automotive car tire, all the way up to something rigid and stiff like an ABS.
Great. Now, we also have to build, once we have the components, we need to actually build the mold. So I'm looking at a few pieces here that looks like I can almost go to like Home Depot or your local hardware store and just pick this up. This looks like particle board.
Yeah, this is basically like a common shelving board you'd pick up at your local hardware store. And yeah, you don't need anything too fancy. Just, the nice thing about this is it's got a nice smooth surface. It's not a lot of porosity, and it's easy to put together.
And you can also use like some kind of acrylic as well, like just kind of smooth material. I've even heard of using Legos.
Yeah, Lego bricks. Anything that's going to come together and make it and prevent the silicone from leaking out is ultimately the ideal material. And once again, porosity, because silicones don't really stick to a whole lot of clean plastic materials or metal materials. But if something's got a lot of porosity to it or it's rough, then obviously you're going to get a mechanical lock.
Okay, so we have that as the border, and then it looks like we have another piece of this that we're going to have on the bottom.
Yeah, this will be our base, our bottom base to sort of support everything, and then we kind of build on top of that.
Okay, so that's the base. We put this on top of there, and it looks like we have maybe a piece of like ABS plastic here, right?
Yeah, this is just a piece of thin ABS plastic.
Okay, so same thing, Home
Same
Depot,
thing.
hardware store.
Many supply stores.
Great. So I got some particle board with some smooth finish on it. I've got a piece of plastic here, and then a couple other pieces here that looks just like little plastic rods.
Yeah, rod stock from many common suppliers, and plastic is a good material because obviously there's no porosity, but we even have people use bamboo skewers because they're already sharp at the end, to toothpicks for very, very fine.
Okay, and you're just buying this rod stock, cutting it, and then just hitting on a grinder just to make it a little cone.
Yeah, and the big thing is we're just trying to narrow this so that when it breaks off the part at a later point, you don't have a massive
Great, and then when we build the mold here, we're going to just use some super glue to kind of put it all together. So just going to basically assemble some...
Yeah, very non-specific products to help in this process. They're commonly found.
So that's great. So with really a very low cost of buying materials, I can go out and build probably a lot of different molds. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to get a whole bunch of this material. I'm going to have enough material for quite a bit.
Yes.
All right, so I've got the mold. I've got the molding compound. I know what I'm going to actually mold it with. Is there any other equipment that I'm going to need to get started doing the resin casting?
Yeah, I mean, at a very, very basic level, these materials can literally just be mixed, poured with really no additional process. These are designed to cure at room temperature, process at room temperature, so you don't need anything too fancy.
Okay.
But invariably, when you are mixing these products, you mix in air bubbles.
Right.
Those air bubbles have a tendency to stay in the liquid and not just magically percolate up to the top and pop on their own. So a lot of times we're using a vacuum chamber to take that mixture.
So that's what we're looking at here.
Exactly. This is a bigger, more industrial for like a shop that does a lot of production of urethane parts. But essentially, we would take the mixed material in that container. It's got all that air in there.
Right.
We put it in there. We pull vacuum for a couple minutes, maybe somewhere from a minute to sometimes several minutes, depending on the size of the batch.
So this is the high-end one, but there's
Yeah.
also like tabletop ones we can get it for a little smaller. What are we looking as far as cost, as far as getting started in the vacuum chambers, that we're going to need to do this?
Yeah, a lot of customers that I talk to, they end up looking on eBay, finding a good deal on a pump, as long as it has some, it's a good, strong vacuum pump. And from there, from several $100s all the way up to a couple $1,000s, depending on ultimately what the requirement is for your
Okay,
application.
so great, a couple hundred to get started, and then as far as the cost, kind of a starter kit here that I'm going to need some compounds, some material that I'm going to pour. What are we looking for as cost here?
Realistically, this with maybe a pigment, a couple cans of mold release, you're talking anywhere from maybe a couple $100s to maybe $250, and we go from there.
Okay, so it's feasible. You actually get started doing resin casting for under $1,000, and probably a nice setup of maybe a few $1,000s. And as you get further into the process, you might maybe spend $5,000 and be in a kind of production mode. But
Absolutely.
on the starting point, I mean, we can really get started for pretty reasonable.
It's a very reasonable process, and with the boom in 3D printing, this process marriages very well with that, and it allows us to do a lot of really.
It's a
great
nice
things.
intermediate step because I can
Exactly.
3D print a part, and then this kind of gives me some short run production. And you might, if you're still staying in short run production, you can stay resin casting, or you might transition that to maybe an injection molded process down the run.
Exactly. This is essentially anything from a prototype to medium, short run production, and it's a bridge manufacturing where ultimately a lot of these parts do end up getting injection molded, and then some don't. They stay in this process.
Right, and because you're out of these molds, we're getting usable parts that can go and be sold
Absolutely.
as final parts.
Yeah, they're usable.
They're prototypes, but they're also fully functional parts.
They're functional prototypes that have a lot of good characteristics, high heat resistance, sometimes UV resistance, and high impact. So we have a lot of that.
Great. Well, let's go start making some parts out there. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Troy.
You bet.